Gothic horror books, part 2. I am back with more Gothic horror reads for you to enjoy, to indulge in, to slip into under cover of moonlight. Hello, if you're new here, I'm Sinead and this is my spooky corner of YouTube, where I talk about spooky books, creepy books, gothic things that I enjoy, things that we watched as kids, and just general shenanigans. I'm going to be telling you about more of the gothic books that I have enjoyed over the years, some classics and some new ones. We are talking atmosphere heavy, we are talking spooky, we're talking low gore, high ghosts, and monsters. There's probably going to be some monsters. And I realised after I'd finished filming that this selection contains a lot of vampire books. I would recommend that you watch part 1 so you can see all the books that I mentioned there, and that's where I also give an overview of what Gothic literature is and the kind of themes and vibes you should expect from a good Gothic book and that we quite frankly are into. There were many comments and many recommendations of great books in that original video, so do trawl through the comment sections to find more book recommendations on top of the ones that I'm going to give you today. What do we mean by Gothic fiction? This is a quick recap of what I am looking for in those types of books, but there's always exceptions to the rule. It's got to have a great atmospheric setting, and usually it's quite isolated. So we're talking the old crumbling castles, the rattling old mansions, maybe it's in the moors, maybe it's in the depth of a dark forest, maybe it's in a foreign destination, or maybe it's inside of us. Gothic fiction is also more psychological than it is straight up gore-fest, and really that is my jam. There can be hints at the supernatural or really overt monsters in Gothic fiction, but it is more to do with the mind. Are the ghosts that appear in the books real? Are they a trick of the imagination? Are they the ghosts that haunt us, or are they actual ghosts that are stalking the village and eating people? Most Gothic fiction also has a delicious sense of tension because there will be a battle going on of some sort, whether that is the fight betwixt good and evil, or a fight to protect the innocent from corruption, or that wonderful mingling of fear yet fascination. The stories usually involve protagonists who are confronted with something dark, something other, something uncanny, and that darkness may be terrifying, but it can also be quite compelling if it speaks to a dark desire that is hidden deep within us. With that refresher in mind, let's get to the next list of great Gothic novels to enjoy. Now, if you're in the mood for more classic Gothic literature, I have a couple more recommendations for you. Number 1 has to be The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. This is a book that I have listed in one of my favourite, scariest books of all time. It is a very short book, it's a novella, and it tells the story of a governess who is sent to a beautiful remote mansion to look after 2 angelic, seemingly, children that live there. Their uncle is their ward, but he is completely absent from the property. When the governess arrives, she finds the children are positively perfect in every way, except that there is a darkness that hangs over the house. The mansion is haunted by the memory of 2 former employees, Miss Jessel and Peter Quint, who were very close to the 2 children and who died in mysterious circumstances. The Turn of the Screw has inspired countless film adaptations. One of my favourites is The Innocents. It also inspired the TV programme The Haunting of Bly Manor. It's a wonderful novella and a really compelling ghost story, and a great example of Gothic fiction in the way that you do apparently have ghosts in this story, but you are always questioning, is this happening in the new governess's mind? Is she warped by her opinion of the children, of her own repression, of her interpretation of what might have been going on with these 2 employees? Is she driving herself mad, and is she damaging the children, or really are there malevolent forces at work? It is a classic. Some people have said that they found the language of the book a little bit heavy or a little bit difficult to get into. Written at the end of the 19th century, I think this book is a great example of Gothic fiction, and it inspired so many stories from there. Another great Gothic novel that so many people are familiar with, that I know very well but also have notes on, is Wuthering Heights. Now, Wuthering Heights is a great Gothic love story, and it is creepy because there are ghosts in it. You have the ghost of Cathy. The atmosphere in Wuthering Heights is so beautifully Gothic because it is set in the north of England in this sort of very barren, very unforgiving and yet incredibly beautiful landscape. The turbulent love affair between Cathy and Heathcliff is played out against this really harsh scenery, and it's very much of its time though. I remember growing up and so many people reading this book and saying it's the greatest love story ever. It's so powerful. This is the love that I want. And then you sort of look at it with adult eyes and go, oh, none of this was all right. This is, oh, whoo. It's a love story. It's not a positive one. It's not one that I think anyone should be trying to emulate. But it's very passionate and it's very wild. Now, a classic, and I have a bang-up-to-date accompaniment for this, Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu, the Irish writer. Carmilla is a book that is credited as inspiring Dracula. It was written about 25 years before Dracula was published, but Carmilla is the sort of prototype, and this is a sapphic vampire story where you have a woman, Carmilla, as the main antagonist. She is a vampire. She is fascinated by the other young woman in the story. But a recent book that's come out, Hungerstone. This is a reworking of Carmilla. It is not following the same plot, but it takes Carmilla and puts her into a story that is set in the 1800s in England. It is told from the perspective of a young woman, Lenore, who has been stuck in a very stale marriage. It is sort of perfunctory. She is there to help her husband hit the tops of high society. She is powerful in her own way. And they come across Carmilla. They come across an accident where they find this woman, Carmilla, in the road. They take her back to their estate, and Carmilla represents this incredible fascination for Lenore, for this kind of proper, strong-minded but repressed woman. And Carmilla releases a hunger in her, but also a hunger in the villagers around her. It's a really interesting and I think very well done reworking of Carmilla. The story in itself is beautifully written. It feels so beautifully Gothic. There is a fascination with blood without it being gory, with life. There is a lot of female rage in it, and there is hunger runs all the way through the book. There's scenes of food and consumption and what society expects you to do in terms of feeding yourself, of nourishing yourself, and what maybe the heart wants to do. I have just finished reading it and I highly recommend Hungerstone. Might be worth a separate review. So those are the classics with one new one in there. Let's get into some more modern Gothic books. Possibly one of my favourite Gothic books. It's The Historian. This book feels like a big, just dark slice of chocolate cake with black cherries running through it. You just want to... I read this book a fair few years ago. I was travelling around Europe because I'm a dick. I was on holiday. And I was reading The Historian, and I was really, really lucky to be sitting in a square in Italy, and I was reading this book and just overwhelmed by how beautiful it was. This is a dense, thick book about the legend of Vlad the Impaler and Dracula. It is historical fiction, it is a bit of dark academia, it is horror, it is Gothic through and through. You have multiple timelines through the story. You have a young girl who has discovered an old book with a woodcutting in her father's library. Her father starts to tell the story of the book, of where it came from, and how it is allegedly linked to Vlad the Impaler and the hunt for Vlad the Impaler's final tomb, to discover whether or not Vlad the Impaler truly was Dracula. You are taken all across Europe at different times in history. It is so sumptuous, it is dense, it is full of interesting historical detail, but it's also compellingly beautiful and darkly thrilling. I just love The Historian. I don't know anyone who has picked it up, who loves Gothic fiction and read it and hasn't ended up going, oh my God. Definitely one to get if you can. It's there. Next up is a book series, but the first book I just loved. This is pulpy, it is schlocky, it is really nicely done. It is trying to tick all of those Gothic sensationalist fiction boxes. It's Anno Dracula by Kim Newman. Anno Dracula takes place in the 1800s, and the hook is, what if Dracula had won? So in this universe, Dracula is real. Dracula was not defeated at the end of the novel, and now we have Victorian society under the control of Dracula because he has married Queen Victoria. He has married Queen Victoria. Vampires exist. You have the vampires, you have the living. In this book, you also have the Jack the Ripper murders. So you have the mystery around that. You have other characters from fiction, from different Gothic fiction and historical fiction books, as well as, you know, completely new characters in there. It is such a decadent, indulgent, to the point of campy, but still nicely laid out book that doesn't take itself too seriously and just piles in all of these different references from different works of fiction. I so enjoyed it. It is part of a series. You have The Bloody Red Baron, which is set in World War I afterwards, and then Dracula Cha-Cha-Cha, which is set in the 50s, kind of the Dolce Vita film era, which is really, really indulgent. There's many more books after that, but those three I enjoy, but particularly Anno Dracula. If you like the series Penny Dreadful, Anna Dracula may well be your bag. And also, who doesn't love the series Penny Dreadful? If you guys haven't seen Penny Dreadful yet, go, 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 go. If you would like to hit subscribe and like right now, I will send you a crow. If you hit subscribe and then you see a crow later on, that's probably from me. Yeah. Now, if you're looking for a book that has exquisite world building, a twist on vampire lore, and some sapphic themes to it, I highly recommend The House of Hunger. This is a sumptuous book by Alexis Henderson. The world in which this book is set is very Victorian, very Gothic. It's got elements of steampunk to it as well. But in this universe, there are households across the country, and they have blood servants. They have people that they drink blood from. It's not that they're overtly vampires in the sort of conventional sense of it, that they're undead, but they take blood from servants, and those servants have a hierarchy to them. And for our heroine, who is in a desperate situation, lacking money, has a miserable backstory, it represents a way out of the slums, as it were. I adored the world building behind this story. It was really vivid and indulgent at the same time. A strong story, all the right themes to it. A wonderful author, Alexis Henderson. Get the book. Another fairly recent book that I fell in love with, Fine Shade by Kate Griffin. This is not a supernatural Gothic story, but it is a wonderful Gothic tale. It is a story where we have an anti-hero as our protagonist, a young woman who is going to be a governess at a huge property, but she has dark ulterior motives from the start. From the start of the book, you understand she is not a nice person. She says horrible things. She has horrible observations about people around her, but she has a plan. She is going to use her wiles to get exactly what she wants from the world. This is a book full of plots, full of intrigue, full of plotting and planning. And it has, at the end of it, a twist that does not affect the story, but it is a nod to a classic work of Gothic fiction. And when I read it, I just started clapping in my living room. Yes, yes, well done. If you've read it, then you know, but I absolutely loved it. I can't say what it is, but it is a nod to a particular work of fiction that I love. Maybe I've mentioned it before, and I think this was a masterstroke. I loved Fine Shade. Another piece of historical fiction that is not really supernatural, but it's got very creepy elements to it, is Shadow of the Wind. A wonderful sprawling book that is set in the 1940s in Spain, in Barcelona. You have the Cemetery of Forgotten Books, this enormous, huge library where a young boy finds a book and it unravels this huge tale of lost love, of betrayal, of mystery, of torment. It is such a juicy, lovely book. It is sad and it is harsh in places. It is sad and it is melodramatic in places. There are sections where you'll go, whoa, okay, whew, but the vibes are there. Rebecca Netley is also an author to check out for great Gothic ghost stories. She wrote the wonderful book, The Whistling, which I think is a true chiller, but she also wrote The Black Feathers, which is much more Gothic in its storyline, its plot. It does have a creepy supernatural element to it, but it's much more in keeping with those classic old tales. A lovely young woman who is newly married goes to her husband's big old house in the wilderness, and it turns out his first wife and child may have died in mysterious circumstances. You have people who are obsessed with spiritualism, trying to conduct seances to contact the other side. And it is said, when you see the black feathers, it is a sign that ghosts are near. I love this author's work in the way that they capture the atmosphere and tell a compelling story. The Black Feathers is a wonderful one to put on your list. Now, at the time of recording this, I'm not sure if Rebecca Netley has distribution in the US. I actually reached out to the author in a DM because a few people had messaged saying they wanted to access The Whistling and The Black Feathers and they weren't able to from the US. I'm not sure if that has since changed. I apologise if this book is not available to you after me building up so much, but do check out their work. And a very recent book that I am going to throw in here because it's one of my favourite books that I've read in a long time. It's Victorian Psycho. This is not a supernatural story. This is a bloody story. This is a story about a serial killer in a Victorian setting. The Gothic vibes throughout this are brilliantly realised in what is a very dark, very funny book about a woman who has a very, very dark past, who turns up at a Victorian estate there to be a governess. She moves her way around this property, encountering all the different people who are larger than life. None of them are particularly compelling. There are no nice characters in this story, old and young. And she wreaks havoc. She wreaks havoc in this sort of very passive, blasé way, while making observations of just what's happening around her. And it is so brutally funny. It is so shocking. And it is, in my opinion, one of the best books that is out at the moment. Virginia Fito, who wrote it, she also wrote Mrs. March, very dark, very strange book. Victorian Psycho is a very short book as well, and it's a great example of how you can say so much in fewer words. You don't always need masses of pages and masses of prose to convey so much. She scene sets Victorian England and this Victorian setting perfectly in a matter of words. I don't know how she did it, but she did it. And that's not to say like bigger books and thicker books are wrong, because I love to lose myself into a big chunky book. But this novella is just perfect in its length and its intensity. I recommend people read it, but you might want to check trigger warnings and be prepared just to be shocked. There you go, another rattle through some great Gothic novels that I hope you will enjoy. Quite a diverse list in there. You've got some that lean more to the historical fiction side, and then you've got more that are kind of, woo, oh, full-on spooky, snugging, bitey, oh, candles and moonlight. I'm always looking for more recommendations, so feel free to drop them in the comments. I would love to know any ones involving werewolves, because I just haven't read a lot of werewolf stuff lately, apart from Such Sharp Teeth by Rachel Harrison, which I loved, which I did actually love. But I could read more werewolf stuff. Don't know why. I've read a lot of vampire novels, I've read a lot of ghostly novels, I've read a lot of haunted house fiction, so it's really up to you guys if you want to have more Gothic books or if you want a subgenre of that I could delve into for you. If you like this video, as ever, please hit subscribe, hit like, save it for later, send it to someone with a message, we are discovered. Stay spooky, bye-bye.